My work has split over time. So the first majority of it is around the neurobiology of language, how we can do this as a species when most of our cousins and things can't. But in the last 4 or 5 years, I've taken a more sort of applied bent and moved into a sort of a consumer neuroscience area where we're interested in trying to use the tools of psychology and neuroscience to understand consumer behavior, consumer decision making. The big research question that I'm really interested in is how language happens in the brain, but in a very sort of applied sense now, because a lot of the work that I've done for years is really very lab-based, very sort of ivory tower. How do we understand individual words or pairs of words? And now what I'm more interested in is how is it that we're using language more generally? Like when we're reading texts, or we're listening to audiobooks, or we're watching videos, or we're just engaging in conversations. How do we move from those kind of lab-based questions to much more ecologically valid, interesting questions about the way we really use language instead of the very detailed, mechanistic kind of things that I spent the early part of my career working on? One of the findings from my lab, but also from a number of others, is this idea that there's nothing really unique in our brain for language. Everything that is involved in language processing is involved in other cognitive skills. Paying attention, executive functions, the kind of inhibiting irrelevant information and paying attention to the most important parts, keeping things in memory. All of those systems are combined in unique ways in humans. And what's exciting is that other species like chimps or other apes have all of those same systems. What they seem to lack is the ability to combine them in the same way we do. And I think that's exciting because it starts to get you to the question of, well, what is it specifically in the wiring of our brain that's different from our closest cousins, despite the fact they're really similar? And yet we can do this complex behavior that's not available to them. And I think we're starting to narrow in on the answer to that. The emphasis that we have on trying to make this more relevant to society is around how do we make this interesting and accessible to people in all walks of life. So for instance, this is surprisingly relevant to lots of businesses because of course advertising and marketing are essentially communication campaigns. And that might be, hey, we'd like you to buy our fancy new widget. Or it might be the NHS trying to do a health marketing campaign around stopping smoking or reducing alcohol consumption or healthy eating or any number of things. So these are real world problems that are being addressed all the time in industry, in government, in the charitable sector, in health. And the question is, how do we make this kind of research most applicable so that the learnings that we take from the lab can actually be benefiting society as a whole in a larger sense?